So let's learn how we can work with scaffolding in Visual Studio. So let's create a brand new project. We'll do a new project, and we're going to choose an empty MVC project. Go ahead and choose ASP.NET Framework. Call it whatever you want. Click OK. And we're going to do an empty MVC application. Click OK. It's going to create a new structure for us. And then the first thing that we're going to do is we want to go ahead and create a new controller. Let's close that window and we'll come over here to Controllers, right mouse click, and we'll choose Add Controller, and we'll do Empty Controller, Add, and we'll just call it Home Controller. Click Add, and it makes our new controller for us with our index action method. And then what we want to do with our index action method is let's go ahead and right mouse click in there, and let's actually before we do this, let's go ahead and go make a model. So let's go over to Models, right mouse click, Add, and we want a new class because a model is just a class. And let's go ahead and call this class, this model, team.cs. Click Add. And then within this model, we're just going to add two properties. We're going to add a public string or team ID with a get and a set. And then let's go ahead and add another public string team desk with it get and a set. And here are two attributes we have. Now, one thing that I want to do in here is I want to add a data annotation. This is one you might not have seen yet. So we're going to add a square bracket, and we're going to type in the word display name, and we'll say team space ID, and on the next one we'll say display name, and this will be team name. Notice we say desk there and name there. This says there's an error, and that's because you have to click on the little light bulb and use the component model. Now what this will do for your data annotation is that when we create a scaffolded view, meaning it's going to be a strongly typed view to a model, and it will try to generate source code for us, that when it creates a form, it's going to go ahead and use this as the label for the input rather than the name itself of that attribute. Same thing here. It will say the name team name rather than the word team desk scrunched together with no spaces. This is a way you can use data annotations and make scaffolding work a little bit easier for you. So let's go back over to the home controller, and let's go to the index action method. And remember, before you do anything with views, making strongly typed, you need to build. So let's go ahead and build our solution and make sure everything is okay. And it looks like our build will be just fine. It succeeded. Right there it says succeeded. So let's come back to the action method, put your cursor inside of it, right mouse click, and let's choose Add View. And this time, instead of saying empty without a model, let's go ahead and say create and see what happens. And let's go ahead and attach it to our model, team. Click Add. And this is going to create a brand new view for us so that when we click on, or when we go to the index action method, we'll go to the create view. I know that seems a little weird. That's okay for right now. And notice what it did for you. First of all, it said we're going to strongly type this view to work with the model team. Then it says we're going to go ahead and do an HTML form. And then it adds the anti-forgery token. And then down here it says let's go ahead and add our validation summary. Now remember, the validation summary is called if there's any errors in the model. Like if we went and said required or max length, things like this, then our validation summary would generate errors for us on the view. This HTML helper is called a label for, and this makes a label for the input. and it says, let's go make a label, grabbing the team desk display name attribute. That's what it's going to do. And so it will go and grab that. Remember the team name over here? It will grab team name and display that on this line. And then the next one says, let's go ahead and make an edit box for that team desk. And it makes a validation message if we wanted to go ahead and put validation for that item. The important thing to realize, number one, is where is the ID that we made? We had something called team ID. That did not show up. And that's because team ID is a special word. Well, let's see what that actually means. When we come back over to here and we said that that field is called team ID, that actually means something to Visual Studio. So since this field has the letters ID at the very end of it, the .NET framework, or the entity framework, will assume that this is going to be the primary key for that model. For instance, if I had another one, public string raid, and I did a get and a set there, that could be considered a primary key. However, it already found one before it. So the first one it finds, it determines or makes the assumption that that will be the primary key for this model. If I put this one first, then it would have been the primary key. Meaning, you need to be careful how you name your columns or your properties in your model. You can learn that later on. You can get around this by actually using a key attribute instead. But this is what the default would do for us. And so the reason it did not show up back over here in the view is it said, oh, hey, that team ID, that's probably a primary key, and how often do we really want our users to enter the primary key and mess with those? So it just leaves it out of the view. We could come back over to here and enter it, but what we're going to do is we're going to dynamically generate a value for that primary key. So let's see how we do this. This says that we have a form, and this form will say, since there's nothing in here, it will try to find an HTTP post method with the same name as this view, which is called index. Now over here, we already have one index right here. And since we didn't label it, that is the HTTP get. So I could come down here, paste another method in, and say HTTP post, and then right here, since the view over here says when you submit, I will try to send the contents of this form to your HTTP post, and since the contents of this form are linked to the team model, we can come over here and say we're going to receive a team model object, and I'll just call it my team. So this now will come into here and say, hey, HTML form, when you click on the submit button, go find the post method for the index view, so it's the same name, and go ahead and pass the contents of that form to this object. Now we have an error here because we have to go in and use the model. So I'll click on that, we'll use the model. This now receives the contents from that HTML form that we sent. So now what we could do is, let's say that we wanted to work with a data structure here. And we wanted to say public static list, and we want to work with team objects from the model. And we'll call it list team. And let's go ahead and instantiate that. List team. So this object will live forever, being that static. And we actually need to go ahead and put our parentheses there to call the constructor. And so now that I have that list created, what I could do here is I could do some code. I could write some code that says, let's go ahead and generate the key value for that team ID that didn't get filled in back in the form. So I could say my team.teamID, which that's the field that we did not fill in because we said it was the primary key, is equal to, and then let's go ahead and generate a new key for it, and we'll say my team dot team desk dot substring. We'll start at 0 and go for 2. And we'll concatenate that with our list data structure, and we'll grab the count and we'll turn the results into a string. So if I typed in Utah Jazz back over here on the form for the team desk, then over here in the controller it would say, let's go to Utah Jazz, grab the first 2 characters, UT, and concatenate it with however many elements we have in our list. When we first start off, we have 0 elements, so it'll say UT0, and that will now be stored to the team ID for the model. Now that I have that object in place, I can say list team, which is my data structure up here, dot add, and I can add that new team object I created in the form that I received right here, and the new key that I generated for that object. And then we could go ahead and return back to the view. Now I'm going to go ahead and set a breakpoint here, and let's watch how it works. Okay, so I've set a breakpoint, and let's go ahead and run this. So the scaffolding goes out and creates a whole bunch of code for us. And what it did is we said we wanted to create scaffold. So it generated all the code in the view for us to create a value using an HTML form. And then we can pass that value that we made on our create form back to the post, and then we can do whatever we want with it. In our case, we're storing it to a list data structure. We could have stored it to a database table. You could do anything you want. So let's see how it works. Team name, Utah Jazz. We'll click on Create. It now comes here, and look, here's the object we received from the form. That object says we have Utah Jazz in the team description and nothing in the team ID. We have nothing in the team ID because we didn't get that in the form. So now we want to say, let's go grab the first 2 characters from the team description, concatenate it on with the count turned into a string, because we want a string concatenated with the string, and let's store that to team ID, and let's see what we get. So team ID is now equal to UT0. Then we add that to the list, so now our list has a count of 1 with a new object in it with the Utah Jazz and UT0. And let's go ahead and continue, which will take us back to the form. I could come back to this form and type in Denver Nuggets. Create. We now receive the data from the form, which is Denver Nuggets, team ID of null, generate a new key, which will say grab the first 2 letters, DE, concatenate it with the count, which is 1. So we should have a DE1 for team name, and store that to the list. So now we should have 2 objects in the list. And this is a way that we can use scaffolding to help us write code. Well, let's go create one more scaffolded item. Let's write another method in our controller. We'll say public action result display team. And in this display team, we want to return a view, and we want to pass that new list data structure that we've created right here, that we keep adding teams to. And we're going to add it to this object, and then we return that object to the view. And let's right mouse click in that action method, and let's choose add view, and we want to call it display team, and this time we want to do a scaffolding of a list. So I choose list, I attach it to the model, and we're passing that a list of those models over there, and we'll click add. This time it says it's receiving the model, but it's an IEnumerable, meaning it's a list of something. Remember our list team? We said it was the list data structure up here. So it's a list of those models. And so that list of models will now be passed to this view, it creates an HTML action link for create new. And instead of going to the create, we're going to say go to index, because that's what we called our controller over here, index. We probably should have called it create. And then it says, let's go make an HTML table. And let's make a row and a table heading. And we're going to use the HTML action link, or the helper, for display name 4, and grab team desk. I'm going to add another one here, though. I'm going to copy. And instead of team desk, we're going to add team ID. And then in another header, we're going to display team desk. And then we leave another header empty. So we have 3 headers in our table. And then we do a for each using the model, which is a list of our team objects. And so one at a time, it's going to go grab an item from that list, which is a team model, store it into the word item, and we want to display, let's bring this up here, add another column. We want to display the team ID, the team description, and then it adds an edit link, a details link, and a delete link. And then what it does is it says, if you click on the word edit, we'll go to the edit action method, which we haven't written yet, and we're going to pass it the ID parameter. The name of the parameter will be ID, and it will be the team ID. So this parameter from this model will be sent as a parameter called ID to the edit method. So let's see how this works. Let's go ahead and run this one more time. We'll go back to our home controller, so we'll start at index, and let's run that. And it's going to bring up our index page, and we'll type in Utah Jazz, click create, type in Denver Nuggets, create, type in Portland Trailblazers, create, and then let's come up here and slash display, I think we called it display teams. Whoops. Sorry, display teams. Let's press enter, and it wasn't team, so I bet we just called it display team, not plural. And we have an error. And that was because I did not include the name of the controller. So make sure you say /home/display team. And notice it now displays the list of our team objects we have from the model. If I put my cursor on edit, and you look down at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see that it will include a parameter for the number 1. So you watch down here at the bottom. I put my cursor there, and it says, go call the home controller, the edit method, and let's pass it UT0. That would pass it DE1, and that would pass PO2. And this is a way you could pass a parameter to another action method, and then in that action method you could use that key or that parameter that we called ID. Remember the ID parameter right here, back over on our display? And so over in that edit method, you'd have an ID parameter coming in, and you could use that ID to now search and do something. For instance, let's go ahead and write the delete action method. So let's stop our program from running, and we'll come back over to here to our home controller, and let's write a delete action method. So we'll say this is called delete, and it's going to receive a parameter of type string called ID. Remember, that's the name that we passed it over here. Whoops. Sorry, I'm dragging items around. That ID parameter is the name that we said we would pass it over here. And let's make the case match also, lowercase, uppercase. So we'll come back to our code, and we'll have our lowercase ID, and then we could go ahead and return this back to the list. In fact, let's go ahead and return it to the display team method, or the display team view. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to say return the view, and we're going to go to the display team view, and we want to go ahead and pass our list of objects still. So in here, we could do something with the delete if we wanted. We could go and search that list to see if we found the item in the list, remove it from the list, and then pass the new list or the revised list back to display team. So this line of code would say, go to the list, remove all of the items that are in there that have a team ID equal to the team ID we received as a parameter. And then let's go ahead and return the new list back to display team. So let's try that out and see if it works. So the first thing we'll do is we'll come to our create, which we called index, but we probably should have called it create. And in that create, we're going to go ahead and add some items. So let's go ahead and add Utah Jazz, create, Denver Nuggets, create, Portland Trailblazers, create, New York Knicks, create. We'll come up to here and we'll specify our home controller and display team method, which will take us to that list. Here's all the items. Let's see if we can delete the Denver Nuggets. Now, if I click on delete, remember, watch down here, then we're going to call the delete method, and we're going to pass it DE1. Let's come back over to our source code, and we're just going to set a breakpoint to watch this happen. So we'll click on Denver Nuggets, delete, ID has a DE1 in it, so we go to see if we can find any items from our list. Our count drops to 3, and so if I run this and go back to display team, we should see Utah Jazz, Portland Trailblazers, and New York Knicks. And this is a way you can use scaffolding to help you write code. And you can do scaffolding on edits, on deletes, on creates, on lists, and it's a great way to let ASP.NET help you. Remember, parameters are passed using that scaffolding. You could write your own, of course, but parameters are passed by saying click on edit, go to the edit action method in the home controller, and pass a new parameter with the name of ID and a value of team ID. You could pass multiple parameters if you just put commas there. We'll talk more about that in another video. So that's how we use scaffolding.